Alright everyone, we start off today by confirming yes, indeed, the plan that Biden has proposed, which really is just a resuscitation of a failed, miserable policy from the Obama admin era, it confirmed, yes, Joe Biden wants to destroy the suburbs. I know that this comes off as a sloganeering thing, like when Trump points this out, when he talks about how Biden wants to essentially chop apart the suburbs and take over zoning laws for the federal government. It sounds hyperbolic because it sounds like you're just making a malevolent comment about something that's actually like social justice or something. It's not really what it's about. What it is it's an electoral scam. What this would do essentially is give the federal government, of course run by Joe Biden, the ability to force communities to rezone. So like right now in the suburbs, you have single-family homes. It's zoned like that for a reason. It's reasonably efficient, like not in the density sense, but as far as design, the way in which it's made makes sense. What this would do, though, is it would allow the federal government to come in and force whatever zoning they would happen to want. So if there are a couple of empty suburban lots, the homes get removed and all of a sudden there's a 5-story apartment there. It really doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense from an infrastructural perspective, because you'd be upping the density to areas that weren't designed to handle that density. The redistricting would be, potentially hazardous to local homeowners' home prices. And I realize that that's like saying, well, you've made it in life and you just don't want poor people next door. It's not about that. It's about urban planning, number one, and it's about the fact that the Democrats aren't doing this to help the poor. Well, essentially, it doesn't matter where you put the affordable housing, the HUD or whatever. Does it really matter if it's on the margins of the inner city or if it's in the suburbs? I would think that it doesn't make sense. By the way, why would you want to take people that are on the government dole and put them in an area where costs are going to tend to be higher by design because they're a mile away from the inner city anyway, with people that potentially don't have transportation on a regular basis or something? It literally, the whole scheme makes no sense. And it also doesn't make sense that the federal government would empower itself or think itself constitutionally obligated to be empowered to zone local districts anyway. The people who do the zoning should be people that live in that area. Now, ultimately, it's an imperfect system now, isn't it? Normally, the stuffed shirts that run the council that's responsible for zoning, they have a little wiggle room because they tend to be at least on the margins of the upper middle class. So they don't have to worry about their area necessarily being redistricted. And by the way, this impacts the middle class. It's funny because essentially what this would do is it would take a bunch of people in D.C., very rich people, and empower them to take the middle and the lower classes and just basically flail around like it was a pile of Legos, and wherever the Legos happen to land, that's where you build your fucking apartment. And it's for political purposes. What this would do is it would take the suburbs that I know the Democrats are worried about leaning more red because they've gone completely off the deep end as far as law and order go, as far as the police and so forth. It would allow them to try to essentially demographically gerrymander the suburbs and try to get more votes. That's really what it's about. It's about political power. It's not about empowering the poor or helping them. It's still going to be shitty made government housing. And slums and so forth. It's just that they're going to move in next door to an area that now is devalued, reducing the overall wealth of the middle class. The people that live in the suburbs, oftentimes, and I speak from experience, of course, I realize there are a lot of NIMBYers in the suburbs that are like, well, we need a new treatment facility, but not here in this neighborhood. Yes, we need more nuclear power, but don't build it within a mile of our suburb. I realize that's a thing, but I've also been on the lowest echelon of society. And people that are in that echelon, in some cases, and I'm not saying that I ever held this belief myself, but in some cases have been sort of brainwashed by, ironically, the rich, by the government, by the true privileged people of society like Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi, people who are extremely wealthy, to hate the middle class. Not to strive to become part of it, but to hate it and want to appropriate some of that wealth. Just don't take it from Jeff Bezos, remember. You're not allowed to do that. That's class warfare, but you can take it from someone who's made it in life to the point where they have a lawn, essentially. The people who live in the solid suburbs, though, the reason why the suburbs are so sprawling and there's so many tens of millions of units around the country is because it's affordable for people in the middle class. These are not rich individuals. The dude making $250,000 a year isn't living in the same suburbs as someone who's making $50K. It's just not the way that it works. And it's fairly compact housing. The suburbs start sprawling out in the early atomic era. It was, by the way, partially a reaction to atomic warfare. The idea was that you wanted as many people as could feasibly afford to do so not to be in the target of an atomic weapon. Unfortunately, then they developed nuclear weapons, but by then people had grown accustomed to liking the suburbs. It was seen as the urban sprawl, and you could argue, arguably, decadence of the suburbs as far as city design went was considered good. It was better than having an apartment because you had a lawn, you could barbecue, you could be Dwight Eisenhower, essentially. In the nifty 50s, that was a thing. The fact that the weapons got a lot bigger and would roast the suburbs too sort of escapes notice. Now people are moving to the middle of nowhere. Now people move into the desert. Now people move into a grassy acre somewhere, 10 miles from the nearest town because it's the only place they can get away from all the fuckwads of society. This would destroy the suburbs, though, and I would like to address as well, because I know there's an outsized number of Vermonters that watch my channel. Just so you know, this would cripple the economy of Vermont if put in place long term. Think of a community, for instance. Think of a place like Woodstock. Woodstock is a tourist town. There's a huge wealth gap. Most people in Woodstock are either very rich or quite poor. The quite poor people have certain apartments that they live in, which are not necessarily the nicest places. I know, I lived in one for half my life. Or there's trailer parks to the west, actually, I believe, or south. And then there's some like smaller sort of slipshod housing on the outskirts of Woodstock, and the rich people tend to live in all those mansions along the green, the nicer apartments, and so forth. There's a little bit of suburb, so-called, there, but not much. Woodstock is a village, it's barely a village, of about 1,400 people. What this would do is it would allow Joe Biden to come in and build a HUD low-income housing in the middle of Woodstock, completely destroying the tourist economy and driving everyone's wages down. It would cripple it. It would destroy Woodstock. Rutland, great example. If you start building low-income housing in the areas of Rutland that are actually reasonably nice, it will tear the fabric of the city apart. What people don't understand is federal policy should be as limited as possible because D.C. can't know what it's like to live in a small town. D.C. doesn't know what it's like to live in the suburbs. You think that all of those rich bitches that make $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, they can command a $10,000 a plate get-together for their next campaign, you think those people live in the suburbs? They're not going to suffer from the rezoning. They're the true NIMBYists of society. It's just like when all of those rioters in California got applauded by the same celebrities that stood there in stark horror the second they started advancing on Beverly Hills. It's the same fucking shit. The true NIMBYers are always the highest echelon of society. The fact that there are plenty of people in the suburbs that are similar doesn't mean that rezoning them at the federal level makes any goddamn sense at all. So you're going to take, 5-10 million poor individuals and put them in areas where it's going to be more difficult to commute to their workplace? That doesn't make any sense. You want them in the inner city. You want it as in proximity to the jobs that they need to travel to. So hopefully they don't even need a car. They can get by with a bike, preferably, to save money, to be able to get better food, to not need as much assistance. That's an efficient way of doing things. The cities are more efficient from a travel standpoint until they get choked to the point of being like Manhattan or parts of central Amsterdam, by the way. It doesn't make any sense. Like, you can take someone who works at KFC and put them 2 miles away from their KFC, and the federal government will make that decision, by the way, of where they're going to live, where they qualify for that low-income housing. Oh yeah, we're gentrifying the inner city and we're going to put several slums, here 3 miles outside of Phoenix. What does it accomplish? And will this not, by the way, cause clashes between these groups of people who really, in many cases, for fundamental reasons, don't have as much behaviorally in common with each other? And you know that the localities and the states will fight back against it anyway. And the federal government will give kickbacks to communities that it happens to politically favor. It is inevitable. It always happens. So yeah, if you live in the suburbs, absolutely. If you value your property and you value, having any semblance of sanity in your local zoning, absolutely, you should vote against Joe Biden. That's about all. Peace out.